The mud had a name. The soldiers of Company C, 318th Infantry Regiment, called it Moselle Soup, a grey-brown paste of French clay and September rain that swallowed a boot to the ankle and refused to give it back. On the morning of September 5, 1944, 23 American soldiers crouched in that mud, 20 meters from the outer wall of a stone farmhouse complex outside the village of Lucain Tramy, France. Their maps said the farmhouse was a forward observation post, lightly held, maybe 15 German soldiers. Take it fast, secure the eastern approach, and the road to the Moselle River bridge opened up. Their maps were wrong. The farmhouse at Lucain Tramy was not a forward post. It was the first tooth of a killing system so carefully engineered, so deliberately concealed, that American intelligence had completely missed it. And the most dangerous part of the trap was not inside the building, it was behind it on the ridge. Because the Germans had spent 11 days pre-registering their mortars on their own position. Every yard, every doorway, every patch of open ground where American soldiers might stand after taking the farmhouse had been measured and memorized by German crews who had already pulled back to the high ground, waiting. The moment American soldiers entered that structure and believed they had won, they were going to be shelled with precision fire by an enemy targeting coordinates they had calculated before retreating on purpose. 23 men of Company C entered the Lucain Tramy complex on September 5. 9 came out unassisted. What happened between those two numbers, and what one exhausted captain did with 9 effective fighters, no radio, and a German battalion closing from 3 directions, is the story of the one weapon the Germans never prepared for. They had prepared for everything except the way Patton trained his officers to think. To understand why 23 men were crawling through French mud toward a farmhouse that intelligence had written off as a light rear guard, you need to understand the pressure crushing every level of Allied command in the first week of September 1944. Patton's Third Army had liberated more than 200 miles of French territory in 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Historians still struggle to convey how unprecedented that pace was. The breakout from Normandy at the end of July had transformed into something that felt, at every level below Army command, like a rout, like the Germans were simply running and the Americans were chasing. Third Army consumed 400,000 gallons of fuel every day it moved at operational speed. By September 1st, those reserves were gone. SHAEF, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, had redirected the bulk of Allied logistics north toward Montgomery's push, and Patton's tanks were sitting on French roads dry, but Patton didn't sit still, he couldn't. His officers, trained under his specific, relentless philosophy of initiative and forward momentum, didn't wait for the fuel to arrive before thinking about what came next. What came next was the Moselle River. The Moselle was the last major natural obstacle before the German border. Cross it with momentum still intact, and Third Army was looking at the Siegfried Line with the campaign's energy behind them. Lose it, let the Germans consolidate on the eastern bank and fortify the towns of the Lorraine corridor, and the autumn became the kind of grinding, yard-by-yard attrition that Patton had built his entire reputation defeating. The bridge at Pont-à-Mousson, 12 kilometers north of Toul, was one of 3 crossings Third Army needed to seize intact, but the western approaches had to be cleared first. The network of fortified farmsteads that commanded the plateau between the Say and Moselle valleys, that meant Lucain Tramy. Captain Daniel Hartwell, 27, from Dayton, Ohio, commanded Company C of the 318th Infantry, 80th Infantry Division. He had been in France 22 days. Before that, he had led a rifle platoon through the fighting around Avranches. Before that, he had been a high school history teacher who coached junior varsity basketball on Saturdays. He was 6 feet tall, spectacled, quiet in the way that soldiers learn to be quiet, not shy, but conserving energy. He did not give speeches, he asked questions. He walked the ground before reading the map, not after. The soldiers who followed him noticed. Sergeant First Class William Billy Okaffer, 23, from Mobile, Alabama, Company C's senior NCO and the man Hartwell trusted most on the ground, wrote in an after-action letter, "The captain, he'd walk the dirt before any order came down. Other officers studied the map. Hartwell studied the mud. I always figured that was the difference." Private First Class Thomas Merck, 19, from Scranton, Pennsylvania, was the company's point man, young enough to still think death happened to other people, experienced enough to know that wasn't quite true. He carried a Thompson submachine gun and a photograph of his sister folded into his helmet liner. Corporal Lewis Wainwright, 25, from Portland, Oregon, maintained the SCR 300 radio with the obsessive care of a man who understood that 30 pounds of electronics was the only thing connecting 23 men to the rest of the world. The plan, as delivered by Battalion S3 Major Alden Cross on the afternoon of September 4th, was straightforward on paper. Company C would move before dawn, reach Lucain Tramy by 500. An OSS contact, a French resistance member identified only as Canard, had confirmed the position held no more than a reinforced squad. Clear it, establish a forward post, signal battalion and prepare to receive Company A pushing through to the bridge approach. There was a flaw. Hartwell saw it but wasn't certain enough to argue it with Major Cross. The intelligence came from a single source, Canard's report delivered 3 days earlier. 3 days. In a fluid September campaign where German defensive lines shifted daily, 3 days was a geological age. Hartwell wrote in his field notebook that night, "I don't trust any position that hasn't been physically observed in the last 24 hours. The farmhouse will have changed. They always change. The question is changed how?" He would have his answer before sunrise. 40 kilometers east, at 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division, Gertz von Berlichingen, headquarters outside Pont-à-Mousson, SS Sturmbannführer Heinrich Voss reviewed the Lucain Tramy disposition with the composed satisfaction of a man watching a chess board he controls entirely. Voss was 41, a veteran of Kharkov and the Normandy fighting, with a mathematician's contempt for improvisation. His contempt in early September 1944 extended to the Americans. "They are fast," he wrote in a division situation report later captured and translated by 3rd Army Intelligence. "But fast men run into walls at full speed. We have built the wall, now we wait for them to run." The wall at Lucain Tramy was not a squad of 15 German soldiers. It was a prepared position housing 63 men, 2 machine gun nests, a mortar team, and a pre-registered fire plan that had turned the farmhouse yard itself into a killing ground, calibrated and memorized before the German defenders deliberately made the building look lightly held. The moment the Americans took it, Voss intended to destroy them with it. His only question was how long it would take them to arrive. Company C moved at 3:30. 23 men in 2 files, following a drainage ditch Hartwell had identified as the most concealed approach to the farmhouse's western face. No moon, temperature in the low 50s. The Moselle Soup pulled at every step. Mech was on point. He moved with the specific slowness of a soldier who had survived ambushes, a controlled shuffle, scanning the ground before trusting his weight to it. At 4:40 he stopped, crouched, hand signaled back. Hartwell moved up beside him. Mech pointed at the mud 4 feet ahead, boot prints. Fresh, the heel impressions still had crisp edges the overnight drizzle hadn't softened, more than one set, moving in both directions, and they were German SS boot prints, the distinctive double-soled tread Mech had learned to read in Normandy, 5 distinct track patterns. Not the trail of a squad, the trail of a rotation. Hartwell pulled Mech back 30 meters, he reached for the radio. Corporal Wainwright had been trying for 20 minutes, nothing but static, the signal blocked by a ridge between their position and the battalion relay. They were cut off from communication and they hadn't fired a shot. He went forward anyway. At 5:02 Company C reached the outer wall. The farmhouse sat dark, no movement, no sound except a cow somewhere in the blackness stamping nervously. Mech went over the wall first. What happened next lasted 11 seconds. Every survivor described it the same way. Silence, then a white flash from the second-floor window, then the world came apart. The MG-42 in the upper window caught Corporal Raymond Chabot, 21, from Chicago, Illinois, in the doorway. First man through. He went down without making a sound. Private First Class Gregory Hollins, 22, from Charlotte, North Carolina, took a rifle round in the left shoulder from a firing port cut at ground level in the south wall, below the stonework, completely invisible from the western approach. The port had been designed for this exact moment. Then the shooting was coming from everywhere. North wall, east outbuilding, the barn, the well house in the yard. Hartwell dropped behind a stone water trough and counted muzzle flashes. He was arriving at a number that made the original plan a fiction. At least 4 distinct firing positions, and that was what he could see. The German voices were controlled, coordinated, soldiers executing a prepared sequence, not soldiers reacting. These men had been waiting. Wainwright got the radio through at 5:10. Major Cross's voice arrived broken and crackling, and it arrived with news that managed to make a deteriorating situation significantly worse. Company C, new orders from regiment. You are to hold Lucain Tramy and push scouts to the ridge east of the farmhouse to observe the bridge approach. Acknowledge. Hold a position they hadn't taken yet, and advance east, into ground with 0 visibility. With 23 men now reduced, Hartwell was doing the arithmetic with the cold focus of a man who has no time for grief. To 21, Chabot was dead. Hollins was conscious, pressing his palm against the wound with the deliberate calm of a man in shock who doesn't know it yet. Hartwell keyed the radio. "Battalion, this position does not match the intel description. We are in contact with a reinforced force. I count at minimum 4 fighting positions, request confirmation of intel source validity and advise." Cross's response: "Intel confirmed through OSS, you are facing a rear guard, press the attack, time sensitive. One source, 3 days old, and Corps was calling it confirmed." Hartwell set the radio down. Looked at Okafor. Okafor looked back with the expression soldiers wear when their officer is thinking something headquarters will not approve of. The situation report read plainly: 21 men, 2 of them combat impaired, weapons running low. No ability to return effective fire, German positions had excellent cover, and the Americans were trapped in an open yard. Hartwell did a magazine count. 5 men had fewer than 2 magazines. Merck had burned his Thompson drum in the first burst. He was down to a pistol and 2 grenades, 43 effective rounds between 21 men. At 5:16 SS Sturmbannführer Voss received the contact report from Lucain Tramy. Americans had entered on schedule, they were pinned. His mortar crew was ready, pre-registered on the yard where they were trapped. All that remained was his order to fire, but the report included one detail that made him pause: the Americans were not retreating. He found this irritating. He gave the order anyway. The first mortar round hit the yard at 5:18, the second hit the north wall. The third demolished half the outer gate and sent Corporal Wainwright sprawling, the SCR-300 skidding 6 feet across the mud before landing face down in a puddle. When Wainwright reached it, the water had already gotten into the housing. The radio was dead. Company C was now completely isolated. No communication, no reinforcement, mortar rounds incoming every 90 seconds from a pre-registered position they couldn't see, a German force 3 times their strength, and Major Cross's last transmission still hanging in the air like a verdict: press the attack. This was the lowest point. And it was at this lowest point that Captain Daniel Hartwell did something that none of the German fire plans had accounted for. He stopped looking at the farmhouse. A like on this video takes 2 seconds. For the men who were pinned in that yard with 43 rounds and a dead radio, it is the least we can do. And he started looking at the ridge. There is a sentence George S. Patton spoke to his officers so often it became a kind of password, a phrase that separated officers who understood his philosophy from those who merely followed his orders. Fixed fortifications are monuments to the stupidity of man. Anything built by man can be destroyed by man, but only by a man who refuses to stand still in front of it. Patton did not invent this idea. He borrowed it from Rommel, from Guderian, from Sun Tzu, from the full sweep of military history he had consumed with the systematic appetite of a scholar who happened to also be a soldier. The principle was ancient: a defender who commits to a fixed position surrenders initiative. He becomes predictable, and a predictable enemy is defeatable, not necessarily with superior force, but with superior knowledge of where their mind has already committed. Patton drilled this into his officers at every level, from corps commanders to company captains. The 80th Infantry Division had attended his command briefings in the weeks before the Moselle campaign. Captain Hartwell had been in that tent. He had written the principle down. He had turned it over in his mind during the long hours of waiting that make up most of a soldier's war. What the principle meant, lying against a stone wall in a contested yard with mortar rounds arriving every 90 seconds, was this. The Germans at Lucain Tramy had engineered their entire defense around one assumption: that the Americans would do what every military manual, every natural instinct, and every visible tactical option demanded: assault the farmhouse from the west, fight through the doorways, take the structure, then call for support and consolidate. The Germans had pre-registered their mortars for the yard where the Americans were now trapped. They had not pre-registered for the ridge above the farmhouse. The same high ground Major Cross had ordered Hartwell to send scouts toward was where the mortar crew sat. 40 meters above the complex, on a treeless limestone shelf, with their full attention directed at the yard below waiting to fire on schedule, their backs were exposed. They were watching the trap they'd set, not the ground behind them. 3 men. Moving under the sound of the mortar itself, because in the moment a round fired, every German head in every position instinctively dropped. But there was a calculation that could not be avoided. During the pre-dawn approach, Merck had spotted something through a gap in the outer wall: civilian figures. An elderly man and 2 younger ones, sheltering in the cellar doorway of a collapsed stone outbuilding near the ridge's crest, 40 meters from the German mortar position. A French family, caught in the exact geography where Hartwell needed to send his flanking team. If he sent 3 men up to the ridge and anything went wrong, If the Germans spotted the movement and turned fire uphill, those civilians were in the crossfire. If he didn't take the mortar team out, German fire would kill everyone in the yard and the civilians would still be on the ridge, alive, watching it happen. There was no clean option. There was only the least wrong one. Hartwell called Mech over. He spoke quietly the way he always spoke. He gave the order and added one specific instruction. You go around, not through. The family against the north wall, you keep them out of it. Move them if you can. Make them face the other direction. Thomas Mech, private first class, 19 years old, from Scranton, Pennsylvania, wrote in a letter home dated September 12, 1944, "The captain told me to go up that ridge and part of me wanted to say no, because I figured we were already finished. And then I looked at him and he didn't look like a man who thought we were finished. He had that look, the look where he'd already decided the next move and was just waiting for the rest of us to catch up to where he already was." Mech took Okafor and Private Joseph Kurtz, 20, from Boise, Idaho, one Thompson, one M1 and a single bar between 3 men. They moved at 5:31, using the noise of the incoming mortar round at 5:30 as their starting signal. Hartwell looked at his watch. He had 4 minutes before the German mortar crew would fire again. If this story has stayed with you, if Hartwell and these men have gotten under your skin the way this history gets under mine, this channel needs your subscription to keep going. Hit the button. Every subscriber makes the next story possible. 531. Mech goes over the wall, Okafor right behind him, Kurtz last, the bar scraping stone as he cleared. Hartwell turned back to his remaining 17 men. One job, make enough noise in the yard to keep every German eye pointed down, not up. Open fire, controlled bursts, make them believe we're still fighting to come through the front. 17 men, 43 rounds. He was spending ammunition he didn't have on a feint that had to last exactly 4 minutes. The firing erupted. The MG-42 responded instantly, raking the water trough, sparks off stone, rock chips against Hartwell's helmet and forearms. Private Martin Decker, 22, from Kansas City, Missouri, was firing his M1 in deliberate single shots, making each one count. To Hartwell's right, Hollins, shoulder wound packed with a field dressing already soaked through, was firing a pistol left-handed, 1 round at a time, with a focus that Hartwell would describe later as the calmest thing he saw that entire day. On the ridge. Mech's team was 40 seconds into the approach when the German mortar crew spotted movement. Not the flanking team, the family. The elderly man near the cellar door had stood to move away from the sound of fighting below, and his silhouette caught a German lookout's eye. The lookout called out. 3 heads in the mortar crew turned toward the civilian position, not toward Mech. Mech later wrote, "Okafor grabbed my arm. He said they're going to shoot the old man. I said they're not, keep moving." I don't know how I was sure of that, I just knew we had to get there first. 20 meters from the position when the crew began to traverse, Mech fired the Thompson from the hip. Okafor's M1 opened up 2 steps behind. The mortar crew, 4 men, went down in 8 seconds. In the yard, the silence hit like a physical blow. No mortar. The MG-42 continued 3 more seconds, stuttered, then stopped as the crew tried to understand why the ridge had gone quiet. 3 seconds of German confusion. Hartwell had been waiting for exactly that. Up through the east gate, now, 17 men crossed the yard through the half-demolished gate, along the inner wall. Private First Class James Whittaker, 24, from Atlanta, Georgia, went through first, turned right, found the stairs, took them 3 at a time. The MG-42 position was at the top, 2 men, and neither heard Whittaker coming because the yard battle below had swallowed all other sound. The gun went silent at 5:37, 6 minutes from Mech going over the wall, but the farmhouse was not taken, not yet. The outbuildings were still fighting, and Hartwell now had his men scattered across 3 positions, the yard, the main house, the ridge, in a building he knew with the cold certainty of a man who had been listening to his briefings. Was registered as a fire target for German artillery east of the Moselle. Success here was the next trap's trigger. He had perhaps 12 minutes before Voss's command realized the mortar team was silent and ordered the backup fire plan. Failure seemed certain again, not from one direction. From 3 simultaneously. First, Private Michael Szymanski, who had gone back 40 meters to attempt repairs on the dead radio, came at a run. A German infantry squad approaching from the south, 12 men. Moving fast, not in assault formation, they were a response force, reacting to the unexpected silence of the mortar crew. Second, Hollins collapsed. The blood loss from his shoulder wound had been accumulating since 5:02 and the body's accounting finally came due. He went down in the farmhouse doorway. Hartwell knelt beside him for 4 seconds, long enough to confirm breathing, long enough to know he couldn't move, long enough to know someone had to stay with him. Third, Hartwell's own ammunition, 2 rounds in his pistol. He'd been counting other men's magazines and forgotten to count his own. 19 effective men, a 12-man German response squad from the south, 2 outbuildings still in enemy hands, a man bleeding in the doorway, 2 pistol rounds. Hartwell made the decisions in sequence, the way Patton's doctrine demanded: most urgent first, most important second, everything else after. Decker, stay with Hollins, you do not move him unless the building is on fire. Clear, Decker nodded once. Wainwright, radio's dead, I know. Get up to the ridge and wave your field jacket. Battalion will have a spotter, they will be looking. Okafor, south wall, take 5 men, 12 Germans coming, you are 6, do not engage in the open, let them reach the gate, then hit them from the wall. 11 men left for the outbuildings, read that arithmetic plainly, 6 against 12 in the south, 11 against an unknown number in 2 fortified outbuildings, and Hartwell in the farmhouse with 2 pistol rounds and a wounded man on the floor. The math was wrong, it was impossible. He did it anyway. Okafor's 6 hit the German response squad at the south gate at 5:42. The Germans were in movement formation, not expecting contact from inside a position they believed their own side still held. The firefight lasted 90 seconds. 7 Germans down, 5 broke south. Okafor lost 1 man, Private Robert Fennelly, 22, from Buffalo, New York, thigh wound, alive and cursing when the shooting stopped. The east outbuilding fell at 5:48, the barn at 5:53. At 6:01, Corporal Wainwright's field jacket, waved from the ridge's crest in clear morning light, was spotted by a 318th Regiment observation post 1,200 meters northwest. A runner reached battalion at 6:15. Company A, 318th Infantry, arrived at Lucain Tramy at 7:10 with a medic team, ammunition, and a working radio. In the divisional operations room outside Pont-à-Mousson, SS Sturmbannführer Voss received the situation report at 7:30. His forward position had been lost. Lost to a force his own pre-battle intelligence had assessed as a company of green American infantry executing a routine clearing action. He read the report twice. Then he handwrote a correction in the margin in precise, controlled script, not routine. Request immediate revised assessment of enemy unit capabilities and tactical methods. He had prepared for Americans to be stopped by the wall. He had not prepared for Americans who refused to stand in front of it. The battlefield at Lucain Tramy in the hours after the fighting had the specific texture of its own silence. Smoke from the east outbuilding that had caught fire during the clearing, the smell of cordite and turned earth, and something chemical from the mortar charges. The sound of a single cow, the same one that had stamped nervously before the first shot, walking through the damaged gate and into the yard, unhurried, as if the war had been a brief interruption to its mourning. Private Thomas Merck sat against the farmhouse wall with his empty Thompson across his knees and his helmet pushed back on his head. He did not take the photograph of his sister out, he just sat. He was 19 years old, he looked 40. The 7 German prisoners were held at the north wall, guarded by Decker, who had not left Hollins's side until the medics arrived, and who now watched the prisoners with the expression of a man who has seen something he did not expect to see, and hasn't yet decided what to do with the knowledge of it. One of the prisoners was SS Unterscharführer Paul Gratz, 26, from Stuttgart. He spoke elementary English. When processed by the 80th Division's interrogation team that afternoon, he said, unprompted, "We were told you would break at the yard. Every American unit we had seen before this, at the yard they broke. Your men did not break at the yard." He seemed genuinely puzzled, as if the fact of American persistence was a data point that didn't fit any equation he had been issued. SS Sturmbannführer Voss, captured 6 weeks later during the Lorraine campaign's final push, provided a longer account in his prisoner of war debriefing in October 1944. The translated text reads, in part, "The failure at Lucain Tramy was the first indication that Patton's subordinates had been systematically underestimated. We designed our defense for the American doctrine we knew from Tunisia and Sicily. By France, they were fighting something different, not doctrine, something personal, something improvised at the point of contact. It was very difficult to plan against." The bridge at Pont-à-Mousson was crossed by elements of the 80th Infantry Division on September 10, 1944. Patton, reviewing the 318th's action report from the Lucain Tramy engagement, wrote a single line in the margin, "This is precisely what the Third Army is." He was not a sentimental man. That was his version of a commendation. Captain Daniel Hartwell was awarded the Silver Star. The citation noted his initiative under conditions of failed intelligence, radio isolation, and superior enemy force. He kept it folded inside his field notebook, in the same pocket as the entry from September 4th. I don't trust any position that hasn't been physically observed in the last 24 hours. The lesson of Lucain Tramy is not that American soldiers were invincible. The numbers make that impossible to argue. 12 men walked out unassisted from 23 who went in. Chabot came home in a box. Hollins lost the use of his left hand. Fenelli carried shrapnel in his right thigh for the rest of his life. Those are the actual numbers. There is no glory in battle arithmetic, only truth. The lesson is what Patton had tried to install in every officer who ever sat in one of his briefing tents. The obstacle is not the problem. The obstacle is information. What the obstacle tells you about where the enemy's mind has already committed, that is the weapon. The Germans at Lucain Tramy were so certain of their trap that they forgot to watch the ridge they were standing on. Their confidence became their geometry. Hartwell read the geometry. Fixed thinking loses to flexible thinking. In 1944, in every war before it, in every conflict since, the principle does not age. The stone farmhouse at Lucain Tramy still stands. A French family has lived in it since 1947. The bullet scars on the north wall were never fully repaired. The owners kept them as a kind of record. If you drive the D958 between Towel and Pont-à-Mousson and stop at the right kilometer marker, you can put your hand on that wall. You can feel where the machine gun cut the stone. You can think about a 19-year-old kid from Scranton going over it in the dark with a Thompson and a photograph of his sister, because his captain had looked at the ridge instead of the door. If your father, grandfather, or great-grandfather served in Patton's 3rd Army, in the 80th Division, the 4th Armored, the 35th Infantry, or any of the units that fought the Lorraine campaign, I want to hear about it in the comments. What unit? What campaign? Where did they end up? Those stories live in family memory and nowhere else. Put them here. They deserve to be said out loud.